My wife slapped me while she was cheating on me with my sister. Not after I caught them. Not when I confronted her. She saw me standing in the doorway, got out of bed, walked over, and slapped me across the face like I was the one doing something wrong. Then she grabbed my graduation trophy and broke it over my head. I hit the floor bleeding, looked up at the smoke detector on the ceiling, and smiled because that smoke detector had been recording everything in 4K for the past 18 months. And Veronica had just delivered the most expensive slap of her entire life without knowing it. Let me back up and explain exactly how a woman destroys her own empire. With a slap she thought was going to break a man. Most men would freeze in this situation. Some scream, some cry in ways they'll remember during therapy sessions years later. "Don't just stand there looking pathetic," she said, voice already in villain monologue mode. "You look like a man who just realized he was never actually in charge of anything important." Behind her, Tiffany was still in my bed, sipping wine from our anniversary glass set, like she was reviewing a performance she had personally directed. "Honestly, June," she said, swirling the wine with genuine leisure, "you should be grateful we didn't make you hold the camera. This bedroom probably hasn't seen this much action in years." Pause. This is my biological sister, in my bed, while providing wine-fueled commentary about my marriage like she was right. Veronica's eyes moved around the room with predatory focus and locked onto the shelf beside the door. "My graduation trophy, just to see me receive it. My mom drove 4 hours with broken brakes, cried in a crowd of 2,000, and said it proved I could survive anything. Cancer took her 6 weeks later. That trophy was the last thing she ever gave me." Veronica knew this story because I'd told her on our third date, and she'd called it the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. Now she picked it up like it was junk mail. "You know what this represents to me now?" she said, examining it with genuine disgust. "Every single year I wasted believing you were going somewhere worth following." She brought it down on my head. Before I could say a word, the world tilted sideways. I hit the hardwood hard, glass and metal scattering around me like violent confetti. Blood started running down my temple. Tiffany made an impressed sound from the bed. "Damn, V, you could have gone professional with that swing." I lay there for a moment, surrounded by the broken pieces of my mother's memory, and something inside me went completely, permanently cold. Not angry. Anger is loud and expensive and makes you act before you've planned properly. What settled over me was something quieter and infinitely more dangerous. The feeling of a decision locking into place at a level that doesn't announce itself because it's already done. I looked up at the smoke detector, the tiny red light blinking steadily above Veronica's head. 18 months of recordings, every word she just said captured, every line Tiffany had delivered from my bed, documented, all of it already backing up to my lawyer's encrypted server. I stood up, walked past Veronica, past Tiffany, past the broken pieces on the floor. "Don't do anything stupid, June," Veronica called after me, already comfortable, already certain this problem was handled. "Just sign whatever my lawyer sends. Move on quietly." I stopped at the door, turned around one last time, and smiled at her. Not the "please forgive me" kind. "You just handed me everything I needed" kind. "Enjoy the party," I said quietly. I walked out. The device I pulled from my dress wasn't some anime superpower gadget. It was a matte black RSA hardware authentication token, the kind of two-factor security key that major corporate banking systems use to authorize transactions that can reshape entire industries. I'd built the infrastructure it connected to 2 years earlier, not because I expected my wife to sleep with my sister, but because I believed in being prepared for every possible outcome. I plugged it into my phone and entered a 12-digit authorization sequence. I didn't freeze Veronica's credit cards. That's amateur hour. What I did was quietly reroute the actual liquid foundation of our entire holding company through a shell structure in the Cayman Islands that she had never known existed. She still had full access to all our joint accounts. She just no longer had access to what was actually in them. She'd discover this the way you discover a building has no foundation. Everything looks completely fine until you put real weight on it. The apartment I moved into cost $800 a month and looked exactly like what $800 gets you. I was literally eating instant ramen on an air mattress on the floor. But if you pulled the camera back, the real story was the folding table against the wall, 4 high-end monitors, real-time financial tracking software, encrypted drives, Ethernet cables running across the floor like the world's most expensive spider web. From the hallway, it looked like I'd fallen off completely. From the inside, it looked like a supervillain origin cave. This wasn't a sad breakup retreat. This was me entering my villain grinding arc. 3 weeks after I moved out, Veronica gave an interview to Financial Weekly. She sat in professionally designed lighting, wearing the diamond necklace I'd bought her. "I need you to appreciate the audacity of that specific choice," as she then proceeded to systematically destroy my reputation with surgical precision. "June struggled with severe paranoia and control issues for years," she told the journalist, voice perfectly calibrated for maximum sympathy. "The surveillance obsession, the inability to trust anyone. I tried to help him, But eventually, I had to protect the people who depended on me. She was wearing my necklace in every single frame. The interview went viral. The board believed every word. 3 clients sent sympathy cards to an address I no longer lived at. But that wasn't the move that pushed me from methodical to accelerated timeline. Leo had been my intern for 2 years. This kid showed up early, stayed late, never leaked information, never complained about the hours. The kind of loyalty that's genuinely rare and takes years to build. His only crime was being loyal to the wrong person at the wrong time. Tiffany forged my signature on a termination notice and had security drag him out of the building like he was a security threat. That's when this stopped being corporate warfare and became a cleanup operation, because they weren't just coming after me anymore. They were burning down everything around me. Innocent people whose only mistake was believing in what we were building together. That's not business. That's cruelty for sport. The call that told me it was time to stop stretching and start the actual workout came on a Tuesday, just before midnight. Leo's voice had the specific quality of someone holding themselves together through pure discipline and not much else. "Mr. June, I'm sorry to call this late. I know you have your own situation, but the bank is foreclosing on my mother's company. They called her loan early. No warning, no reason. They're locking the doors tomorrow morning. I already had the bank's records on my screen. The loan manager handling the foreclosure was currently at an upscale bar downtown, celebrating the quarterly bonus he was getting for destroying a family business. 6 years of perfect payments from Leo's mother. Not one missed installment. They'd called the loan early anyway, because aggressive collections looked good on his performance review. "Send me the bank's registration number," I said. Leo sent it. I looked at the number. I looked at the manager's bar receipts updating in real time. I looked at 6 years of flawless payment history being destroyed for someone's commission. Then I bought the bank. Not the debt, not the loans, the entire regional bank. Every account, every employee, every building, every contract they'd ever written. The acquisition cleared in 94 seconds. "The foreclosure is canceled," I told Leo. "Effective immediately. Your mother's interest rate is now 0 permanently. She'll have written confirmation by Thursday morning." The silence stretched long enough that I checked to make sure the call was still connected. "How?" Leo finally asked. Not really a question. The sound of someone's understanding of reality developing a significant crack. "I own the bank now," I said simply. "They don't get to use my money to hurt your family. Stop worrying about that termination notice. Focus on what comes next." I hung up. Anyone who spent time watching Manhwa Origins knows exactly what this moment represents. This isn't charity. This is a max-level player doing warm-up exercises in the tutorial zone. The bank was light stretching. The actual workout was still 3 months away. Somewhere across town, Veronica's phone was generating alerts about account modifications. She didn't have the context to understand yet. She silenced them without reading properly and went back to sleep. That was genuinely the last peaceful night's sleep she was going to have for quite some time. 3 months after that phone call, they threw themselves the kind of party that makes people write think pieces about wealth inequality. 400 guests, professional photographers, a champagne tower that cost more than most people's annual salary, a string quartet playing with the focused energy of musicians being paid by the hour. The guest list was a comprehensive catalog of everyone who had abandoned me, every investor who had pulled support, every board member who had voted me out, every journalist who had written sympathetic profiles about the brave sisters bringing stability after a male breakdown. All of them ready to celebrate the empire they thought Veronica and Tiffany had built from the ashes of my mental collapse. What none of them knew was that the company being celebrated had roughly the same financial substance as the bubbles in their champagne. I'd been quietly stripping real assets for months. What remained was a shell with impeccable branding and absolutely no foundation. At exactly 9:15, Veronica took the stage, looking like someone who had been professionally styled to deliver a quotable villain line. She raised her champagne glass and looked out at 400 people who had come to witness her triumph. "Building something meaningful requires vision," she said, voice carrying perfectly across the silent room. "It requires sacrifice, and sometimes it requires cutting away the dead weight." The applause was enthusiastic. Some people clapped harder than others, the ones who had bet the most on her being right. If you've read enough Academy manhwa, you recognize this moment immediately. This is the arrogant guild master on stage, calling the quiet guy in the back row absolute trash, completely unaware that the quiet guy has been eating ramen on the floor, specifically engineering this exact evening. At 9:16, I opened the ballroom doors. I didn't rush, I didn't stomp, I just walked in like I belonged there, which as it turned out, I did more than anyone else in that room. The whispers started immediately. "Is that? I thought he was. Didn't she say he was in therapy?" Rumors they had started. Rumors I had let grow. Rumors that were about to become very expensive for everyone who had believed them without asking questions. Gerald, one of Veronica's newer investors, intercepted me. "June, It takes real courage to show up tonight. He had his hand on my shoulder like we were close friends. After everything that came out, Gerald was unaware that I held controlling interest in the private equity fund that had quietly acquired his last 3 ventures. That conversation was scheduled for next week. "Gerald," I said pleasantly, "make sure you try the champagne. It's genuinely the only thing here worth anything tonight." I kept walking. Veronica spotted me from the stage. The performance mask slipped for exactly 1 second before snapping back. She came down toward me with the focused energy of someone who had decided exactly how this was going to end. The crowd parted, 400 people, instinctively understanding they were about to witness something that would be discussed for years. She didn't say anything when she reached me. She just raised her hand and tried to slap me in front of 400 witnesses, the same move that had worked so well 3 months ago. My hand closed around her wrist before the slap could connect. Not dramatically. My hand simply arrived first. The momentum she'd committed to transferred sideways into the crystal glass she was holding, which exploded across her designer shoes in a spray of champagne, and glass that caught every chandelier's light simultaneously. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. 400 conversations died instantly. I leaned in close enough for just her to hear me. "You should have stopped at the trophy," I said quietly. Then I stepped back, reached into my jacket, and produced the remote I'd been carrying for 3 months. One button. I pressed it. Every wall in that ballroom lit up at once. 18 months of documentation, compressed into the most relevant 14 minutes, playing across hundreds of square feet of screen, in front of 400 people. The bedroom footage played first. Crystal clear audio, multiple angles. The slap, her lines about me being pathetic. Tiffany's commentary from my bed. The trophy connecting with my head. Someone gasped loud enough to be heard across the room. Then came the documents, asset transfer logs, forged signatures, internal communications, email chains between Veronica and Tiffany, joking about the paranoid loser they were pushing out. The handwriting experts report beside Leo's termination notice, highlighting 10 specific differences from my actual signature. By the 4th minute, the room was completely silent, except for the sound of people calculating exactly how exposed they were. When the screens went dark, I walked to the nearest microphone. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," I said, and my voice carried easily, because the room had given it nothing to compete with. This saves me from having to schedule 400 individual meetings. A few nervous chuckles. Nobody wanted to be the first to laugh too hard. "The empire you just toasted has excellent presentation, clean books, professional branding. In terms of actual substance, it has roughly the structural integrity of that champagne tower." I nodded toward the elaborate display. Every real asset was relocated months ago. Every contract with teeth was reassigned. Every revenue stream that actually matters was rerouted through structures that aren't listed on any paperwork you've been shown. I let that settle. What you've been celebrating is a very pretty, very expensive, very empty box. The silence was complete. 400 people frozen between the urge to check their phones and the knowledge that this was the kind of moment you don't look away from. If you're wondering why I didn't stop them earlier, the answer is simple. I wanted this room to see exactly who you decided to trust. I set the microphone down and turned to walk off the stage, but Veronica picked up the microphone I just set down. She laughed, looked out at the crowd, then back at me. "You really think this is your trap?" She smiled, the way someone smiles when they've been waiting their entire life for exactly this moment. "You walked into mine. Let me tell you something about people who say, 'You walked into mine.' After getting exposed in 4K in front of 400 witnesses, they're usually running on pure adrenaline and desperation, hoping confidence can fill the gaps in their non-existent plan. Well, Veronica was not running on desperation. She reached beside the stage and produced a thick legal folder with the calm satisfaction of someone who had been waiting quite a while for exactly this moment to feel genuinely good. "Countersuit," she said, holding it up for the entire room. "Filed 3 weeks ago. Fraudulent surveillance, privacy violations. Every recording on those screens violates Clause 14 of our original partnership agreement." She dropped the folder on the table with the specific thud of someone playing a winning hand they've been hiding for months. "Inadmissible evidence collected by someone legally documented as mentally unstable. Your entire case just became our foundation." I watched investors in the back start exchanging the nervous glances of people who suddenly needed to call their own lawyers before this evening got more expensive. And I'll be honest with you, for exactly 4 seconds, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 months. Uncertainty. "I found the recording device 14 days after you installed it," Tiffany announced to the ballroom, wiping actual tears of amusement from her eyes. "But instead of disabling it, I used it." The room went graveyard quiet. But before the room could process that I had apparently checkmated myself, Veronica said 4 words that stopped everyone, including Tiffany. "But I am the one who paid for your services." 4 words completely calm. "The affair wasn't spontaneous," Veronica explained. addressing 400 people with the composure of someone reading prepared remarks. I needed grounds for June's removal that would survive both legal scrutiny and public opinion. A betrayal of that specific magnitude was the cleanest available option. She was the instrument. I designed the situation. I watched Tiffany's expression cycle through 5 stages of grief in real time, from smug mastermind to the horrifying realization that she was just a prop in someone else's heist. "You hired me," Tiffany repeated, her voice dropping to something genuinely dangerous. "The compensation was generous," Veronica said without even looking at her. "The terms were clear from the beginning. You used me as an instrument. That was the arrangement." Tiffany slapped Veronica across the face. "I'm not going to lie to you. Watching villains cannibalize each other is one of the purest joys in existence. I didn't even need popcorn. This wasn't calculated or strategic. This was pure, unadulterated rage, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and doesn't care about the 400 wealthy witnesses watching it happen." Veronica raised her hand slowly to her red cheek, looked at Tiffany with an expression that suggested she had anticipated this exact reaction and already accounted for it in her spreadsheet. "Feel better?" she asked coldly. Before Tiffany could swing again, movement near the front pulled everyone's attention sideways. Chloe had been standing quietly near the edge of the room for 20 minutes. 21 years old, introduced as our daughter, moving through the crowd with the specific, terrifying composure of someone who had been waiting her entire life to drop a bomb. She reached the microphone, adjusted it slightly, and looked out at the room. "I was switched at birth." The room stopped breathing. "I have hospital documentation, signed, verified, submitted to 3 legal jurisdictions this morning." She produced a folded document from her jacket. "I am not biologically related to either of them." Someone in the back said, "What?" loud enough to echo across the silent ballroom. I opened the manila folder I'd been holding and threw the contents into the air above the stage. What those documents described was a biological situation so chaotic that 3 separate hospital records departments had flagged it for administrative review, each time concluding they had no existing framework for what they were looking at. Due to donor mix-ups, undisclosed affairs, and clinical errors spanning 2 generations, every person currently on that stage was biologically connected to every other person through pathways the hospital genetics department had described as unprecedented in our documentation. The switching hadn't resolved the family tree. It had turned it into a perfect circle. The lawyers in the room began making urgent phone calls simultaneously, creating ambient buzzing I can only describe as expensive panic. Before anyone could process the genealogical nightmare, the ballroom doors flew open. A corporate lawyer entered with the focused energy of a heat-seeking missile. Completely uninterested in the surrounding chaos, she announced immediate asset seizure on behalf of an undisclosed creditor, produced a court order, and walked directly toward Tiffany with the confidence of someone who intended to be as dramatic as possible. Tiffany looked at the court order, looked at the lawyer, and did something incredibly inappropriate for a high society gala. The lawyer slapped her. Tiffany's head snapped to the side, and when she turned back, something about her face was fundamentally wrong. The geometry was off. The skin was pulling at the edges in ways skin doesn't normally pull. The lawyer reached over, grabbed Tiffany's jawline, and peeled back what revealed itself to be a hyper-realistic silicone mask. Underneath Tiffany's face was Veronica's face. The real Veronica, still standing exactly where she'd been, looked across the room at the unmasked face staring back at her, looked down at her own hands, and made what every person in that ballroom would later describe as the wildest choice in corporate history. She reached up and peeled back her own face. Underneath Veronica was Tiffany. The lawyer removed her mask, revealing Chloe. Chloe removed her mask, revealing me. I straightened my jacket and looked around at 400 people staring at me with expressions ranging from genuine confusion to complete existential collapse. The remaining iterations of the women, freed from whatever insane structural constraints the reveal sequence had been maintaining, turned toward each other with the accumulated weight of the evening's grievances. What followed was not strategic corporate warfare. It was the sound of a partnership discovering it had never actually been a partnership, expressed through increasingly violent, hyper-realistic face slapping. Gerald, who had returned to film everything, stepped forward for a better angle and walked directly into a backhand intended for someone else. His phone went one direction. His dignity went another. I picked up a fresh champagne glass, confirmed it was still full, and walked toward the exit. At the doors, I pulled out the RSA hardware token one final time, looked back at the chaos, and pressed the third button. I didn't wait 6 months for courts to decide who won. I compressed half a year of corporate litigation into 6 seconds of digital annihilation. Every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. Veronica's offshore accounts drained to zero. Tiffany's legal funds liquidated and locked in frozen escrow. The hotel manager sprinted in with security, announcing the corporate credit card had bounced and doors were being chained pending fraud investigation. 400 people in their finest clothes suddenly needed to figure out how they were getting home from a party that had just been legally seized mid-Champagne Tower. I stepped into the night air and let the doors close behind me. The legal resolution took 6 weeks of the most aggressive litigation I've ever been involved in. The countersuit collapsed when the mask sequence footage was entered into evidence, and the judge spent 3 days trying to understand what he was examining. Gerald settled quickly through intermediaries. David, my former mentor, reached out through 3 middlemen before I agreed to a 4-minute call where I said 40 words, and he begged for his career. The final documents were signed on a Thursday afternoon. I checked the bank balance, confirmed the absurd number of commas, and closed the laptop. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 9 months. I went to sleep voluntarily. I slept for 4 hours, and 11 minutes before, I bolted upright in complete darkness, heart irregular, sheets soaked in cold sweat. I sat in the dark and audited reality. 9 months of events reviewed systematically. The bedroom door, the slap, the trophy, the apartment, the bank, the ballroom, the masks. The further I got into the audit, the less certain I became about where documented reality ended and something else began. I reached for my phone. Case closed. ASSETS recovered. I read it twice. The relief was physical, settling into my chest like massive weight being lifted. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. 3 seconds passed before phone buzzed again. Unknown sender. Your dream has just filed a formal legal appeal. We'll see you in court tonight when you close your eyes. I read the message, opened my banking app, and confirmed which version of reality was operating with superior numbers. This one, by a margin that wasn't close. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. In the space between being awake and being asleep, where jurisdiction becomes unclear, I did what I had always done when something attempted to operate outside my established terms. I took control of it. The lucid override engaged like the RSA token. Not dramatically, just a switch I'd installed in my operational architecture years ago. The dream entity materialized with the confidence of something that had retained expensive counsel and genuinely believed it had legal standing in my own subconscious. I looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then I delivered a single, unhurried, existential slap directly to the REM cycle of the thing that had the audacity to file a legal appeal inside my own head. The entity shattered into billions of copper pennies, each catching light from no visible source, raining down through the dark in absolute silence until the last one struck the floor and the sound faded into nothing. The appeal was denied. I slept until morning. Some people can't even dream without winning. The entity learned what Veronica, Tiffany, Gerald, and 400 ballroom guests had already discovered. The man with the RSA token doesn't negotiate with anything. Not corporations, not courts, not even his own subconscious. This level of absolute, reality-bending control is exactly what keeps manhwa origins running at full power. If you want to see what happens when someone tries this, while I'm actually awake and operating at maximum capacity, that subscribe button is the only appeal in this entire story that gets approved without a fight. Hit it.